Welcome to the Abyssinian Syllabary, where we spell out Ethiopia in 33 characters. I'm Yves-Marie Stranger, your host and the compiler of these Abyssinian lives. Nota bene, while any resemblance to actual countries, past or present, and to historical figures is not purely coincidental, this is a work of fiction. For a primer on these Ethiopian characters, newcomers may start with the prologue by Manuel de Goes. To order the book or a poster of the Abyssinian Syllabary, visit Ethiopia.com. That's UTHIOPIA.com. The imagined life of Cornu de Lenclos. Give me eternity, but with the best cheese. Melka Madi Samet, Happy New Year, or, as the late Rembaldian scholar Jean-Michel Cornu de Lenclos would have had it, Melka Madi Samet. The 1891 daguerreotype shown here, unearthed by Cornu in his quest to reveal the poet's life in Abyssinia, gives us a mopping Arthur Rimbaud as he travels on board the steamer from Marseille to Affinar, a destination one rather hopes Mr. Cornu de Lenclos will have reached himself, and without too much hardship on the way. Boarding the paquebot, Cornu would waggishly holler for an attendant. A private berth with silk sheets and Limoges porcelain for the tea steward, and fill it with Ethiopian ouzo, not with tea for heaven's sake. A pot of China ink, a Mont Blanc, and a writing pad. Nothing but plain ivory paper will do, I'm afraid. And place these necessities next to the porthole. I have always liked to work with a view in front of my eyes, whether it be the blue hills of Entoto in Ethiopia, the Etruscan countryside in Volterra, or, lately, the cardamom mountains of the Kingdom of Cambodia. Whatever the means of transport, be it a mule in Gojam or a pink scooter in the streets of Chiang Mai, Monsieur Cornu de Lenclos was always the most agreeable of travelling companions. His Latinate vocabulary, which he put to good use in all the language he's ventured to Gallicize, and his heavy French accent, an attribute he was too generous to preserve uniquely for his mother tongue, and his perpetual sense of the world's enchantments, made him the best of friends with whom to wander this very world. From the very first time I ever set eyes on this strange gent, we were fast friends, some 17 years ago, in the archives of the Bibliothèque Municipale de Montpellier. If I was at first bewildered by the 19th century enfant du siècle that I discovered standing behind me, I soon fell under the spell of his charisma. Jean-Michel Cornu de Lenclos, as he presented himself, affably enough, was a short, well-proportioned man. He had a neatly groomed beard and, back then, a crown of wispy hair that later he would take to shaving off completely. He wore patent shoes, pressed beige trousers, an extravagant silken jacket, which no one knew the name of any more, save for one tailor in Firenze, reported Cornu, when I later inquired, and an English clergyman's shirt, fitted with a round collar. The rakish fin de siècle dandy, for if Théophile Gautier or Karl Joris Huysmans had leapt out of the shelves, this is how I imagined they would have been attired, leaned in towards my lectern and intoned in a theatrical undertone. We were, after all, in a library. Young man, without wishing to be a diversion, I have been aware for a day or two that you are perusing with attention Borelli's Travels to Meridional Ethiopia. The book, which stands 80 centimeters tall and bears its title in gold leaf on its spine, is, as such, very recognizable. Cornu de Lenclos went on to tell me he had read the work himself, some 20 years beforehand, upon his return from his travels to Ethiopia, and that he had not set eyes on the volume since, nor heard of anyone besides himself being remotely interested in reading it. He asked me if I had yet reached the whereabouts of Mount Kaka, a mountain located in the Ethiopian Rift Valley, first triangulated by the French geographer. However, I had not yet read that far in the book. Together, on that first day, we strolled out of the library. Before long, Cornu de Lenclos was telling me in hurried tones the Asmari, whom he likened to Abyssinian troubadours, and whom you could only hear in certain select bunabets of the Kazanchis neighborhood in Addis Ababa. "Have you heard of the troubadour Sevirima?" Cornu had urgently inquired in an aside, for he loved digressions. "A divine Abyssinian cacophony is the music I daily hear, cascading from my library on Mount Tabora. A damsel on a dulcimer sings the multitudinous Abyssinian lives," he had quoted, seemingly from memory. Cornu de Lenclos was, foremost, an Orientalist. His LinkedIn profile, still online last time I checked, listed his occupation as station submaster on the Mandalay railway line by the old Mulmin Pagoda. Some readers will place this Mulmin as the setting for George Orwell's 1936 memoir, Killing an Elephant, while the old pagoda is borrowed from Kipling's Road to Mandalay. By the old Mulmin Pagoda, looking eastward to the sea, there's a Burma girl a-sitting, and I know she thinks of me. Cornu's LinkedIn status read, "Track under repair." I do use the term Orientalist, despite the vilification with which the word has been loaded. De Lenclos' dress would not have been odd in the luggage of a Victorian setting off for his grand tour. Cornu had always dreamt of the Orient. He attempted to acquire the Tibetan language by holing up in a cupboard with a dictionary, while still a cadet at the Britannique Military Academy. He would have transcribed the language as Thibetan. Yet Cornu de Lenclos, to his chagrin, was never to prove adept at languages, despite, or because of, his facility with his own vernacular. He undertook the journey to Egypt as a pilgrim in Flaubert's footsteps. He travelled to Iraq and was to later publish a book on the forgotten Art Deco architecture of Baghdad, to Yemen, which he quaintly called Arabia Felix. He was a frequent visitor to Japan, where he practiced calligraphy, Taiwan and Hong Kong, where he sold furniture, and to French Indochina, where he had been born, and which he continued to designate by just such a name. But, more than any other country perhaps, Cornu de Lenclos travelled to Ethiopia, the land he had discovered at 27 during the military regime of the Derg, a geographical hapax he was to confide to me years later in one of those Kazanchis bunabets. Cornu de Lenclos declared to have come to Ethiopia to carry out various interior design assignments. Before profligately pouring the money he had accrued into publishing, de Lenclos had made a fortune as an interior decorator in the 80s, and I do believe that there are still a few tired governmental hotels that bear his distinctive mark. I myself discovered, to my stupefaction, a parchment magic scroll lampshade at my bedside bearing a winged minotaur during a weekend spent in the hotel Lalibela Goha. In actuality, Jean-Michel Cornu de Lenclos was in pursuit of the other, the distant other, the one who would display a genuinely different way of being to him. Ethiopia, ultimate Orient. Cornu's early readings, Le Père Huc, the French encyclopedists, and Jules Verne, Victor Ségalen, Pierre Loti, and Henri Michaud too. Cornu was nothing if not eclectic in his reading tastes. All this had given him a longing for this other, not the knitted exotic, but the absolute others. In Addis Ababa, the military curfew forced him to spend long, blissful nights in the Debrizet Road bordello in which he had shacked up. 30 years later, the establishment of ill repute having long been replaced by a shopping mall, de Lenclos still reminisced about it with affection, calling it my sinecure, my magisterium, and my monastery. Cornu was a publisher of flair during the last 15 years of his life, a publisher and a craftsman of books. The catalogue of the Archange Minotaur reads like an ode to variety and to literature itself. You find in this miscellany Baltic poetry and 18th century histories of Ethiopia, 19th century political pamphlets, Ode à la merde, Pamphlet des pamphlets, de l'originalité en France, as well as an erudite work on the automats venerated in Hindu temples as stand-ins for the gods. The Archange Minotaur's motto was well chosen: I limit myself to everything. Cornu's publishing house's versatile collection displays a pleasing mélange, and to read the titles placed alongside each other would be a choice method if one were to attempt a life at once faithful to the man and to the publisher. Histoire de l'Éthiopie de Job Ludolf, Abécédaire des ailleurs, Le grand mystère de Jonathan Swift, Matou, Histoire du chat parfait, 2 leçons sur l'islam, Le voyage d'Andalousie, Manuel de contemplation humoristique, Blaise Cendrars, Sans visa, Poème laiton, Copte du Nil, L'or du vin, La science et l'islam, Épiphanie de l'ange, Venise en clair-obscur, Ombre toscane, Déroulement de l'ange, La cuisine de Maître Queux, L'éternité et les meilleurs fromages, etc., etc. And the roll continues, one would say woven of the same cloth. However, it is precisely the fact that each work was first of all distinguished by its very originality that is their distinguishing feature. A man of letters life's work in close to 100 volumes. Cornu de Lenclos presented, annotated, and designed each and every one of these carefully crafted beaux objets. One sometimes found more or less transparent nom de plume for the prefaces, and even, at times, laying claim to the authorship. The Archange Minotaur's Kama Sutra was, in this manner, signed by the Indian sexologist Sadhu Sablok, Sadhu at a standstill, with a preface by the Finnish syncretist Askons la tripote la, ask me to be tickled. Other prefaces were penned by Manuel de Goes or his Donish doppelganger Manuel d'Oromo. My own brief travel relation, C'est pas qui trop vite s'efface, came out with a striking illustration of an Abyssinian rider on its cover by the Ethiopian painter Menelik. De Lenclos' personal emblem featured a winged minotaur, perhaps seeking an exit to the labyrinth by the heavens, such as Icarus. As to the particle he had affixed to his given name, de Lenclos, it itself signified an enclosure or a maze. He had chosen the moniker when he started off as a designer, as, he declared, it suitably impressed Japanese clients. The name also denoted his whimsy, as well as Cornu's fascination for everything aristocratic. He was very partial to Gustave Flaubert's Ivory Tower, in which the hermit from Croisset professed to want to retire from the world, a world that, in the words of Flaubert, beats every day with renewed vigor against the embattlements of the writer's tower like a rising tide of shit. And one cannot deny that Cornu was most certainly what could be dubbed an elitist. But he was an elitist in the French tradition, which is to say, a meritocratic one. He had no craving for purity or lineage, nor was there any place in his mind for the blood and soil trope. He did love a good story, especially a made-up one, and a good name too, and a noble one, even if it were assumed, as long as the bearer carried it well. As to the brown tidal wave that he saw engulfing the world, well, it is not an unfamiliar feeling to most of us, some of the time. I never was able to meet the Ethiopian painter Menelik. I later heard that Cornu claimed to be a disciple of the 17th century Zuda or Pata Shanjen, but that Cornu himself simply called Bada Shanran. Nor did I ever run across the scholar Manuel de Goes outside of a work of fiction. I did come to appreciate the lightness of touch of the brush of the first and the deft pen of the latter.